I just want to say that I commend your parents for taking the stand that they did and being bold and talking to you guys, because it's terrifying. It's terrifying. It can be terrifying to talk to your kids
Yeah,
about those subject matters: sex, bullying, suicide,
yeah,
health, and STDs and all that kind of thing. And
yeah.
the average Black family they're not having those conversations.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Living African Podcast. Today's topic will be quite an interesting topic that I personally have been very interested in, especially as a new parent. You have all these fears and anxiety about raising your child, especially in a very technologically developed world or technologically advanced world. They're exposed to so many things that we weren't, especially the millennials. When we were growing up, things have changed. You just don't have kids playing out there down the road, down the street till the street light comes up. Like things have really, really changed. And there's so many unanswered questions, which I hope that we can answer some of them today, or at least get a different perspective about parenting and just especially parenting in a very fast changing environment, maybe foster homes, having a foster home, and just answering all questions regarding parenting. I just wanted to add a disclaimer to this conversation. It's going to be quite triggering. And so, listeners' discretion is totally advised. If this triggers you, please do not go further because we're going to be talking about quite sensitive and triggering topics. So I have with me here Kirby Gibbs, who will eventually introduce herself and talk about her credentials. And I'm super excited to have Kirby on this platform today. So how are you doing today, Kirby?
Oh, I am doing quite well. It's such a pleasure being able to sit down and chat with you.
Same here, same here. So can you please kindly tell us who you are?
Okay, so as you stated, my name is Kirby Gibbs. I'm a native Houstonian. I went to school at Stephen F. Austin. I got a dual bachelor's degree in psychology and in radio, TV broadcasting and communications. Doing communications, I was a TV news reporter for a couple of years at an ABC station in East Texas. During my stint there, it opened my eyes to a lot of social situations that kind of tugged at my heart. And being a news reporter, I couldn't just tackle everything. I get calls. I was the first Black woman to report at that station,
Yeah.
like for 30 or 40 years. And so I got a lot of phone calls needing, help, requesting my assistance, whether it was with the family or the community. Some of the news stories I did were heart wrenching, having to report on murders, on domestic violence cases where these kids were having to witness their parent being, shot point blank, by a
Yeah.
father. And the list goes on. I switched gears and got into the social work arena, working for the state of Texas as a CPS caseworker. Before I did that, I did a lot of volunteering just so I can get in the door. I landed at a domestic violence agency, which really opened my eyes to the cycle of abuse and the reasons that children end up in care. My heart was kind of hard. I had a passion for children. I still have a passion for children, but early on, I couldn't understand why or how a parent could allow their children to witness some things and go through some things and not be more protective of them. So my
Yeah.
heart was not as understanding, to put it lightly.
Mm-hmm.
But in working with domestic violence, that population, and having to learn about the cycle of abuse, about red flags, about generational, things that are passed down, behaviors that are passed down, I started to understand a lot better, and have more compassion for
Compassion.
the women. I did a lot of preventing and outreach work going into the communities, talking against domestic violence and sexual assault, even talking to the men, opening their eyes about how things that they say or do, how it affects every household member, especially the children, and how that, in turn makes a difference in the quality of life that they have as adults. And so, yeah, that brings me here, right now. I am a licensed child placing agency administrator. I'm over 2 agencies in the Houston area, one of them being my own Fortress of Faith Coalition for Families and Children, and the other being Functional Home. They're located on the north side of Houston in Fifth Ward. So our goal is to establish safe, welcoming homes for children who are in CPS custody, who've been removed from their own families. And so in doing that, I also got into the community. I have a arm of Fortress of Faith that allows me to go and do presentations on parenting, on preventing domestic violence and sexual assault. I go into the workplaces and I work with even the construction and industry workers. They're known as having one of the highest rates of suicide and fatalities from opioid abuse. And so because my passion is on building stronger families, I try to address each individual household member. So from the children to the mother to the fathers. And so going into the workplaces, having those conversations with the men has been quite a game changer,
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And most importantly, thank you for the work that you are doing. It's extremely important. And I really wish that we had something like that growing up. Probably we did, but they were not as common. There's so much to unpack with respect to your experience, but I hope that, I can pick and choose the more impactful aspects of your experience so that we can further discuss or elaborate on. The first thing I'd like to talk about is you had mentioned cycles, how you learned about cycles of abuse, cycles of generational, like things that go down generations. And it's quite interesting because the other day I was just talking to one of my friends and I was just saying that actually being a parent, from my experience, and especially from what I have seen as well, being a parent can unravel certain childhood traumas that you never ever thought were even traumas, talk less of being present in your life. You can have like quick flashbacks when you see yourself reacting to a child a certain way. You just have a quick flashback about how somebody did that to you when you were growing up, And so it's just one of those things that you catch yourself in the middle of it, at least if you have that discernment. And to me, I believe that's how generational habits actually go down, because it's like you remember somebody doing that to you and then you do it to your child and then your child does it to somebody else, and that's how it goes down generations. So can you further elaborate like what you understood about these cycles? And most of the time, these are toxic cycles that go down generations and also ultimately affect families.
Right. Well, you said it all. These things oftentimes do creep up when you're actually in the moment of parenting, or you're in a situation in your own relationship and you're having a discussion and you remember, oh my gosh, I thought I got over this, but I'm triggered because he sounds like my dad, when he would fuss at me about certain things. So one of the things that reigns true is that a lot of these issues that we have, we don't really talk about it. It's kind of taboo. And a lot of people, you may recognize something as an individual, but you may brush it off. Also, you mentioned discernment. If you don't have a certain level of discernment or even education, or you're not mindful, like self-reflective of yourself.
Yes. Self-aware.
Self-aware, then you're not even going to flinch at it. It's not going to be an awkward moment or a aha moment. And so having the conversations, going out into the communities, that's like number one, because what that does is it allows people to understand and realize that there are certain things that are not normal. Like if this is how you grew up and this is what you saw, you saw your father being extra harsh, to your mother, demanding certain things. She would go to work and come home and cook and clean, make sure the kids were all good, but maybe dad had a horrible day at work, comes back home with those frustrations and takes it out on the whole family. That may present an environment where there's fear involved, where there's emotional abuse involved. And so if this is how a person grew up, you may not even recognize it in your own life as an adult because it's normal to you
Yeah, that's
until
your norm. That's like your norm. That's all you know. Yeah, you don't know
right.
what you don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's when you start having these conversations or you speak with someone else whose reality is a little different than yours, then you're like, oh, what's wrong with me? Like, is there something really wrong with this picture? And
Yeah.
so then asking the questions and then talking to your kids. Sometimes, as parents, we have the questions, just talking to our children about it and unpacking it with them helps us grow also, and it helps us grow as a family and understand what our kid is going through, how they're processing it, what they're thinking about. And so depending on the level of understanding and the age of your child, having those conversations is very important. You don't just see something happening or occurring that they're doing, and then not address it. And it's how you approach the situation that determines the success of, how that actually is going to shape the child or change the behavior. Yeah, understanding that you're not alone, that there are other people that go through some of the same things that, we've gone through, and talking about it, having a safe space to talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Actually, that kind of aligns with the essence of this podcast, to create the safe space where people can come on and have those conversations. Because growing up, especially in the African community, and I know the African community is quite similar to the African American community as well. Like, you see something, don't say nothing, and you can't question certain things that you see because you be looked upon as being rude or disrespectful. You're not supposed to say certain things because it brings a disgrace upon the family, even if it's at your own downfall, or even if it's sacrificing your own happiness. By having conversations like this, that makes me really appreciate my parents even more, because my parents, especially my mom, made sure she had these conversations with us for as early as I could remember. She always set that foundation for us to always come to her. Like, I trusted my mom with everything. I found myself in very compromising situations, even with family members, not in terms of abuse or anything, but I knew that I could come to my mom and talk to my mom about it. You know what I mean? For example, there was a moment where, first of all, breast ironing is such a very big thing in my country. So I remember there was like one of my aunties, she came home and she was from the village. And apparently back in the village, what they do is when a girl is starting to like sprout, like when her breasts are like sprouting and stuff like that, they kind of iron it out. I don't know. I forgot the notion behind it, or the mentality behind it. I don't know if it's to make the breast grow or to make the breast not grow because you're growing, you're developing too fast. Because I know for sure I developed at very fast, even faster than my older sister. So she wanted me to like come. She was like, come, and I have to like iron your breasts or whatever. And I told her, I'm like, go ask my mom. And once I told, and my mom is a medical doctor and she doesn't believe in those things, right? So once I told her that, I wasn't even telling her because I knew my mom was going to say yes or no, but I knew that that was actually a way of me indirectly telling her no, because I knew I could bet that she would not ask my mom that. So, I mean, that was my own way of respectfully declining. But when I look at kids who probably don't even have anybody to talk to, they probably would have been in a very hard situation, because if I told my auntie no, that would have been a disrespect to her, considered disrespectful, right? And I was quite young, so I wasn't in any position to tell her no. So if I didn't have anybody that I knew had my back and could back up my decision, I probably would have given into that and had my breast ironed. As you said, it's very important to create safe spaces, especially for children, to have open conversations, because children are still helpless right up until they're adults. Even sometimes as adults, we could be helpless, especially young Black girls. Having that space to let this child know that I have your back is very, very important. And now another thing I wanted to really ask you about, because it's something that, I mean, I've had a couple of conversations with friends and we've been going back and forth with this, but maybe you can give a different perspective, or at least a clearer perspective. It's about the cycle of abuse, whether domestic abuse or sexual abuse. With respect to domestic and sexual abuse, I was talking to a friend the other day, and we were actually talking about sexual abuse after like a sexual abuse episode that I had had. And this was with a guy who was actually sexually abused, and then he became addicted to sex. So it could go both ways, right? You either are addicted to sex and then you are in a position to actually sexually abuse other people, as we saw, like in the case of R. Kelly, allegedly, or you could be sexually abused and then it could be such a very strong trigger that you're asexual, or you do not even know how to act in relationships because you have that trigger. What is the reasoning behind that? And like from your own experience and your own knowledge, what do you have to say with respect to that, and how can we change the dimension of circumstances like that?
That's a very heavy question. And I have to answer it from not just a professional perspective,
Yeah.
but from a personal perspective. And I do my work, I can't really separate the two. When I say personal, I actually mean spiritual. Being a believer, of Christ, and understanding that a lot of the things that we go through aren't just what you see in your face, right?
Mm,
It's a spiritual aspect that's connected to it as well. And
yeah.
so when I think about specifically sexual assault and how that can run in a family line, I recall situations and stories where a young woman may have cried out to her mother and or to an auntie or to a trusted family member, and instead of them believing her,
Yep.
they blamed her, the
Mhm.
victim, and called her a liar. And what did you do? You must have been walking around the house with them little shorts on. I told you not to be walking around. Things like they make the victim the the person who's at fault,
Yeah.
or downright don't believe them.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the number of cases that I've dealt with where the mother just downright did not believe the daughter. The daughter, made an outcry that, the stepfather, the boyfriend or uncle, touched
Mhm.
them inappropriately or raped them. And oh no, they couldn't believe it. And they're grown now and they still have not it hasn't been acknowledged that this is an issue. Of course, that's going to have a mental impact on a person, especially if they are not believed, yet along them actually going through that atrocity, right? People are more likely, if you've been abused sexually, to either become the abuser,
Mhm.
or a lot of cases, like you said, they either are asexual, they just swear off sex, they have a hard time relating to other people, or even, in marriage they have,
Yeah.
problems. But then you have this phenomenon now where, unfortunately, because especially with young boys, if their perpetrator was another man or older man, a lot of times that causes confusion. So whenever a young child is introduced to anything sexual early on, when they're still developing, their brain is still developing, they're still, learning about themselves, they're
Yeah.
still, when you are exposed to sex at an early age,
Yeah.
then you can't undo that, right?
Yeah.
You can't undo it. And because you're still learning and you're afraid to ask certain questions,
Yeah.
a lot of these things are internalized, or they look other places because there's something that tells them that something is not right about this situation, but
Mhm.
either they've been threatened, so they're afraid to talk to somebody about it,
Yeah.
or they're ashamed. They're ashamed because they know that something is off. This is not how, I was taught, or my mom told me not to let anybody touch me in this area, but they don't say anything because they feel like they did something wrong, right?
Mhm.
And so harboring these feelings and not being able to deal with it early on, it does cause confusion, such as, well, I kind of liked it. They know it's wrong, but there's
Yeah.
something that they were aroused in a way that they've never been aroused before, and they don't know how to explain it. And
Mhm.
so they may believe that because someone touched them in this way and they kind of were aroused or they liked it, maybe I'm gay, or maybe
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? And so unfortunately, a lot of people who are identify as, being homosexual, they have experienced, some type of assault, on that level. And because it happened so early on, and because they didn't have anyone to disclose to, or to actually talk about it and unpack that situation, they're embracing an identity that really wasn't theirs to begin with,
Yeah.
And so when we talk about generational things, if there are other young kids in the home, in the family, who sees that it's okay to act out in this manner, or this is some, I mean, it gets deep, especially, you have this nomenclature, kissing cousins and stuff like that.
Yeah.
These are things that parents should be very mindful of and watchful of. You want to be protective. You want to know the people that are around. If a child does not want to hug an auntie or uncle, I don't force them to do that. Usually kids are pretty good at discerning energy and discerning people. You never know why that child has an adverse, reaction to someone. So you don't force them to do that. And so realizing that while it may be uncomfortable, if I went through it as a woman, then if we don't nip it in the bud, like spiritually also, it's a fine line, because you don't want to expose a child too early to such matters, right? But at the same time, when they leave you and they go to school or they watch TV, they're exposed. You want to get ahead of it also. That's why I come back to, it depends on your child and their level of understanding and their age. If you know that the likelihood of them walking out the door and I'm also a foster parent, and I had a 10-year-old baby girl in my home, and she made friends with the neighbors, and I let her be outside to try to give her freedoms. And I overheard a conversation they were having outside the door, and they were talking about kissing, and they were talking about, had they been kissed by, and these are two girls, another girl, they're 10 years old, And so what do you do with that as a parent? You can't hide and act like, they're not having these conversations, or they're not engaging in these type of activities. So you have to talk about it, and you have to ask questions. I didn't want her to feel as though she should be ashamed. I asked her a few questions, and she said, why are you asking me this? Did you hear something? Did you hear something? I said, well, listen, God doesn't let anything happen in the dark that doesn't come to the light when it concerns you and your safety, So just know that I'm here, to talk to you. This is what, the expectations are, because you're God's child, and this is what, the word says. I don't think that children are ever too young to learn about what the Bible says. I think it's a great foundation on so many different levels. And so, and I could fall back on that, and being a part of a community, whether it's a church community or a school community that also has those same values or instilling those same things, is very paramount, for kids and helping you raise your child. If you're trying to do it by yourself and just you and your husband, I mean, it's beautiful, but it means a lot when a child can hear some of those same things coming from an auntie or a church member, or,
somebody else. Yeah, it's actually great that you brought up that example about, just the exposure and everything, because I remember growing up, it was a taboo. Like, they shouldn't even catch you talking about a boy. Talk less of kissing someone. Like, man, the scrutiny that you were going to receive, and probably beating in some cases. I mean, that was usually not the case for me. My parents did this thing that they literally, I mean, looking back, I really appreciate it. But to me back then, it was so annoying, because everybody else's parent was just like whooping them and getting over with. My parents never laid hands on us. What they did was they would talk. These people could talk, and not even like yelling at you. They would tell you, sit down. They will have a conversation with you. Never yelling. Never, ever yelling. They will have a conversation with you. Talk about this. Talk about that. Talk about boys. Talk about sex. Talk about STD. Talk about everything under the face of the earth. Like, they're going to talk, and then they're going to ask you, do you have anything to add or do you have anything to say? So I mean, back then it was quite boring and very, 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 very annoying. They had these conversations with us whenever we did something, or at least before, every time before we went to school, because we were leaving them. We were in a boarding school, or before we went to university, like whenever we went to visit and then we came back, they always made sure to remind us. And I remember there was a point that my sister and I, we were so fed up and we were like, we're not bad kids. Like, you guys, stop talking to us. Like, we've heard you 1,000 times. And this is, mind you, this is when I was in my mid-20s. Like, they were still talking since when I was like less than 10 years old. And my sister and I were like, we're not bad kids. Like, we get it. Like, just stop. Like, it's okay. And I mean, since then they haven't like had those official conversations with us, but some of the time the conversations, though serious, could tend to be casual, more casual. Looking back, I really appreciate them for that, because if they were just whooping us, we probably would not have learned like valuable and sustainable lessons to take us through life. With that being said, I really wanted to touch on the aspects of exposure, like you said. And this is one of the topics that I wanted to transition into. Growing up as us millennials and like the people of older generations, we grew up in a time when there was no internet, there was no World Wide Web, there was no social media. So we didn't have as much exposure. And I'm well aware that if we grew up in the time of social media, we probably would have been way worse than the kids here. Because I know historically, like the 80s, the 70s, it was a very sexually promiscuous time, We didn't grow up with all of these things, like all of these outlets where kids just have access to information in the palm of their hands. A child can literally learn how to bully another child. Another child can learn how to take his or her own life. Like, I mean, there's just like with the school shootings, and I mean, it's just crazy. It's so crazy. It's like, as a parent, it's very terrifying. Like, you don't know what your kids are exposed to. You don't know if they're telling you everything that they saw or heard, so sometimes you just got to resort to praying, like pray for God to protect them and stuff like that. But from your own point of view, well, first of all, from your own experience, what have been like some crazy stories that you've heard or you've come across or you've had, like the cases that you've had, which you can share about, like how exposure, and in most cases bad exposure, could impact the life of a child?
Yeah, well, it's so sad, because you're right. I feel like the exposure has caused children to have to grow up faster than what we did. I mean, I always felt like we were a little bit more grown, a little bit more mature. These kids are being exposed at an earlier age when they're not fully developed mentally or physically, but they're expected to make decisions based on what they've been exposed to that we didn't have to make until we were in our 20s or 30s, right? So I just want to say that I commend your parents for taking the stand that they did and being bold and talking to you guys, because it's terrifying. It's terrifying. It can be terrifying to talk to your kids about those subject matters: sex, bullying, suicide, health, and STDs and all that kind of thing. And the average Black family they're not having those conversations.
Yeah.
Even into adulthood, there's a lot of things that I had to learn on my own through my cousins, through TV show like Bill Cosby in A Different World, and not like we grew up. That's what raised,
That's what raised us,
because our parents weren't really talking about it. Now they don't have those TV shows that have any value. It doesn't have any value. It's all about, making money a quick way, being silly, being goofy, that kind of thing, not even using your imagination. Before we were building things and playing out, just exploring, talking. Now it's like even the communication is different. So to even sit down and have like a one-on-one conversation with some of these kids is like have you been sleeping all day? Or what are you doing? It's hard for them to find words sometimes, yet alone to explain why they're doing what they're doing, other
Yeah.
than, well, so this is just what it is. So this is what I advise parents to do, as their children are growing up. If
Yeah.
you can keep them away from the tablets, the social media. I mean, I know they have parenting, parental guards and stuff like that on these things.
Mhm.
And I also know that they're a good pacifier and a good babysitter
Yeah.
sometimes. But first of all, it's not very good for their eyes. You do want to keep your kids abreast on technology, right? So that they
Yeah.
can be a contributor in the IT field or whatever the case is, or just, but I will never substitute one-on-one time with TV time.
Yeah.
Some people recommend, no more than 2 hours a day of screen time. Some people say 30 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
I try to do like no days with, like at least a day every other day. I mean, if you can incorporate that in some kind of way, keep
Yeah.
your child busy, do family things at an early age so that they're not fiending for screen time, fiending for, these
Yeah.
electronics, then you're already a step above, right?
Yeah.
But in the event that they are exposed, parental controls and having some type of control over who they talk to, what they're looking at. I'll give you a story. So I had a foster child who I had placed in a home. She had just gotten there. Usually foster kids are not allowed to have cell phones and tablets, especially not when they first get into a home. They want to establish, a baseline and see
Yeah.
how the child, reacts to rules and to the new placement and all that kind of thing. See if
Yeah.
they're trustworthy, how mature they are, if they can be given certain privileges, right?
Yeah.
And independence. Well, then you can reintroduce a phone. Well, in this case, one of the young ladies, she was like 14 years old. She went to a home visit with her mother. Her mother had hidden a cell phone in a teddy bear.
Hmm.
And so she took the teddy bear back to the foster home. The foster mother found that it was kind of odd that the foster daughter was in this bathroom for as long as she was in there for. So she, knocks, she doesn't answer. So she peeks in, she sees that she has this phone. So she takes the phone away. The girl finds the phone again, starts, texting someone. Make a long story short, the young lady ended up texting someone who she found on some social media app. I believe it was Facebook.
Hmm.
And let this grown man know, all the way from Oklahoma, we're in Texas, where they live. She was buying drugs from them
Oh.
and soliciting, like using her body for payment. And so this man knew where they lived. The foster parents were hysterical, but it's like, you don't see a problem with this situation. You're giving your address away to total stranger, to a drug dealer,
Yeah.
and a pedophile because
Oh my
you're
gosh.
14. You're compromising your safety and your family's safety. I mean,
Yeah.
the list goes on, right? So it's like, what kind of mindset does a child have to be in to think that this is okay? What have they been exposed to? And so to have those conversations, and also there has to be a balance between not shaming the child and using
Yeah.
a situation as an educational moment. And
Yeah.
that's something that, I try to teach. Unfortunately, the Black community has a hard time with that. And I think a lot
Hmm.
of it stems from slavery.
Yeah.
I know, like, back in Bible days, they say, spare the rod, spoil the child.
Or out. Yeah.
The thing with that is, when you had a nation of people who took that to a whole nother level, right? So we've been abused, we've been mutilated, we've been whipped, we've been beaten, all this kind of stuff. And these are our Black Americans. These are like the Africans in the diaspora, who've had to deal with this. And it's still in our
Yeah.
in
DNA.
our DNA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a part of us that feels like if we beat the child into submission, then we're doing what's right.
Because our ancestors were done that by their slave masters as well.
Right. Right. They were taken, their voice was taken away, their language was taken away. They had to hide, who they were. They
Mm-hmm.
couldn't, wear their hair, the way that they originally came there. They had to learn a new language. There's all this stuff. They couldn't practice the religion and just
Mm-hmm.
all these things that exerted power and control over a whole nation of people.
Yeah.
So we're still living in that trauma right now. That trauma is still in us, and so we have to undo the trauma by being a little bit more patient, by
Mm-hmm.
using our words, and not allowing our emotions to drive the conversations or drive the outcome of the crisis that we say or we think that we're in. Yeah,
Yeah.
so just monitoring what the kids watch, being patient, realizing that this rebellion comes from somewhere.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I totally agree about what you said about the African American community. I would also like to add that it's kind of similar to the African community as well. Not with respect to slavery per se. I'm talking about the African community that was left behind, right, in Africa. I feel like life tends to get really hard, especially for a majority of the Africans out there. I mean, even the wealthy Africans today had to struggle somehow. Like just the whole system as a whole, it presents a way of struggle that our ancestors went through. Like they had to literally struggle right up from the villages. A lot of our parents that live now in the city, they used to live in the villages. They used to trek long distances. Like it was a matter of survival. So when you're living in a system where you have to literally do everything to survive, like just to have basic necessities, things like, for example, mental health will not even be a priority to you. Things
Right.
like, like nobody has any time to pamper you, or they consider that pampering, or any patience to sit down and have conversations. It's either you're doing this or you're not doing this. Like this is a matter of survival. So that kind of aggressive way of handling situations, which I really do not blame people. It's based on the circumstances that they're in. Again, as we're talking about cycles and generational curses, that kind of goes down generations. Because, I mean, someone who grew up in a village had to literally struggle to fend for themselves and they made it. Like, they don't see why another person or maybe their child should have an excuse to not be able to do anything. Granted that times are changing and things have actually changed, but they just don't see that. And they just believe if I suffered and I'm here, you have to suffer too to make it. So that mindset goes down generation. That's just my point of view or my understanding, at least. That mindset goes down generations to the point that in our community, like I remember growing up and watching movies, and you see like the Caucasian kids yelling at their parents, and we're like, oh boy, oh Jesus, like you can't even do that. Or at least I would not go to the extreme of yelling, because sometimes it could be disrespectful, or actually all the time you don't have to yell at your parents. Just expressing yourself to your parents, even in a gentle way, that's like a taboo in our
Yeah.
community. Like, do
Yeah.
not even dare, you know?
Yeah.
Again, it was always looked upon that expressing yourself, regardless of however you're doing it, is disrespectful, especially to an elder. And even an
Yeah.
elder person does something to a younger person, and the younger person reports, they're going to listen to the elder person first. So it's like there's always that hierarchy that had to be followed growing up. So I think that, again, this boils down into that generational curse that goes down generation, especially in our societies, like the Black societies. So it's definitely something that we have to take a step back and like look at our past, look at the reasons why certain things are happening in our lives, and be the people to stop that from transcending, or at least from continuing into generations down. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is, of course, growing up, we really cannot choose the friends that our kids make, right? But at least we can, I guess, guide them on how to choose friends, because those friends actually are people that are going to influence them in one way or the other. And at the same time, just dealing with life as kids are growing, especially in school, like going to school and experiencing bullying and, I mean, all kids come from their own orientation, their own background, and it's just like a pot of like a mixture of characters, a mixture of backgrounds, a mixture of values, which may or may not be good. So how do you think parents can traverse situations like that, especially with kids or at least teenagers who are growing and trying to discover themselves, but then they're exposed to like all these friends and all these kids who also have their own ideas?
That's a great question because you want to celebrate self-exploration, like getting
Yeah.
to know yourself. And you also want to appreciate the diversity, of people. I mean, because how else are we supposed to combat racism and, bigotry and all this kind of thing, right? So, one of the things I would say is, first of all, fostering a home environment where your child feels safe to ask questions and get to know you as a parent. Because sometimes we don't even really take the time to tell stories about our childhood growing up and our friends. So my mom would tell me a lot of stories about her and fights that she's gotten into as a kid and just different things. My dad, on the other hand, I really don't know anything. We lived in the same home,
Mm-hmm.
but he would expect us to know that this is not a person you need to hang with. It's kind of
Yeah.
judgmental. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, how do you really learn from that unless you are teaching us, telling us through your own experience? So being open as a parent about some of your childhood stories, the things that you've been through.
Mm-hmm.
Also using moments where you're watching TV or watching movies to ask questions like, what would you have done in that situation? Or what do
Mm-hmm.
you think about what this little girl said? How would you have handled it? I use that to say, well, do you think this is a good friend? Or how would you be a better friend than this? So using TV, using movies as an opportunity for open discussion, first of all, to see where your child is, how they think, how they process things, and also so that they're not just watching, they're not just being entertained, but
Yeah.
they're understanding what they're watching instead of it formatting, some
Yeah.
idea in their head, right? Because they're looking at it from a critical eye, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
not just accepting whatever that's being given to them. So when they're out in the real world, because you've had these conversations, it's a little bit more natural, right? And
Yeah.
then also going a step further, when your kid comes back home from daycare or when they come back from school, instead of saying, "Hey, how was your day?" and they say, "Good." It's like their favorite word, good. Okay. What was good about it? What was different? What made it better today than it was yesterday? What did you learn? Do you have
Yeah.
a new friend? What's your friends' names and how old are they? That's one of the things I had to teach one of my foster children. She every day she would come back and she had a new best friend. And I'm like, well, you just met this person. What is their name? Oh, I think their name is, oh, I forgot. Or how old are they? How are they your best friends? Like, do y'all have anything in common? Did y'all just say hello? Like, what kind of conversation did y'all have? So
Yeah.
having those engaging conversations with your child, like to understand, well, how are you choosing these friends? What makes a good friend, a good friend? Is
Yeah.
it because they dress nice, they have like the latest shoes, or is it because they can sing or their parents let them get on TikTok and they do TikTok videos all day? Like, what is it? So when you understand what they're being like, when you have normal, regular, unlike tense conversations,
Mm-hmm.
it it makes them feel comfortable, first of all. It lets them know that you're not like stuck in the dark ages and you have these unrealistic expectations for them. But it also lets them know that you care about them. Like, they're people. These children are little people. They're developing, they're learning, and what they go through matters. It took me a long time to kind of like under not a I'm like, why? I don't understand a child and their thought process, or what they could possibly be going through that will make them want to end their lives. Like, I don't understand. Like, it's not, they don't
Yeah.
have to pay bills, they don't have to. But the bullying, and even back in the day with us, I mean, we didn't really call it bullying. I guess we called it bullying eventually,
Yeah.
but we would make fun of each other. Like, it was like a way of life. It was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you weren't cool if somebody didn't talk about you and you didn't have a comeback for it.
Yeah.
So now it's like you can't say anything. And I understand, well, because it's not just between me and this one person or me and the class. It becomes a situation where everybody in the school knows. It started being one thing and it grew into a whole lie. And now everybody thinks that, this and I'm doing that. I'm not even that kind of person. And, they're having to face these people every day. And especially as a parent, if you don't know, also be aware of behavior changes. If there's a change in mood or a change in, their eating patterns, things like that. But when it comes to picking friends or helping your child pick a friend, I think what my parents did was best. Know the child's parents, know the friends, get to know them, invite them over, talk to them before you let your kid go out, to movie night or sleepovers. Know the parents. Some parents really don't care. They're like, oh, somebody wants my child. That gives me a little break. I get, time with the husband. And so, but no, take the time to know these parents, know the kids, set the tone, and ask questions. Just be engaging. Pop up to the school. Don't just allow the buses or transportation come back and forth. Like, put your eyes on some of the kids. Introduce yourselves to even their peers and to the teachers. And I think that will also lay a foundation of accountability. So if people see you as a parent and they know that you're involved and they know that you care, then your child is less likely to have some of the problems that some of the kids who don't have involved parents do. So
yes, and I totally agree with that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now let's try to digress a little bit since we're almost running out of time. I know you are a foster parent and you have quite an experience from a parent perspective and also with respect to placing people in foster, at least pairing people in the foster system. Foster homes, or at least fostering, is something that is seldom really discussed in the African community. And it's very, very uncommon. And that's also because it's not something that we really grew up with back home. We probably, I mean, we definitely have a sense of community back home, but we just did not call it fostering. Like you always had, I was talking to a friend again the other day. I'm like, don't you remember? Like there was always one random person that was just part of the household. Like one random person from the village or just some random person. And our parents always have them come in and they stay with us and they go to school and we just grow up together as a family, In several households, there was always that one person that's just random. That's not necessarily even related to anyone. They're just leaving there. So I would assume that that's like foster or fostering, but then it's not like as organized. It's not like a whole system that's organized here as it is back home. So can you walk us through the whole process? And also, it's something that I'm quite interested in because I've actually been thinking about being a foster parent. So, but I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to go. So this is definitely an answer to like my questions that I have about the foster system. So can you just walk us through about like on how it starts and like the different processes to take and basically from start to finish?
So one thing I have to attest to the African community. I got a chance to spend some time in Ghana and I saw that like that just, oh my gosh, it touched my heart on so many different levels. So in Ghana, there's struggle there. Here we have a different kind of struggle, but the struggle is handled differently in Africa because the community is more close knit, right? Everybody has a sense of responsibility for each other. There's no man alone, right? Here in America, you fend for yourself almost, and not even just in the Black community, but in America, period, there's this notion that when a child turns 18, they're off on their own. They get right. But what about those kids? Incarceration is a big deal here in America. Drugs are a big deal. And when you start getting into drugs, you start to push away your family. You have members who don't want to deal with that. You went and laid down and had these children, you have to figure it out, especially when you have the grandparents are becoming younger and younger, right? They're young, so they're still trying to live their life. They had their kids, they struggle with their kids, and now they have some freedom. And so they're not really trying to be grandparents. They want to
Yeah.
go clubbing and live their best life and travel. And so unfortunately, that leaves a void in families, right? Where people are, and even if they do have their kids, you have some families who are working, right? So as far as the fostering goes, that means that other people have to kind of stand in the gap, right? The
Yeah.
thing that got me into it was James 1:27, where it says, pure and faultless religion that God sees as true religion is this: to look after orphans and widows in their time of distress and to keep oneself from the pollution of this world. That's from James 1:27. Yeah, 1:27. And so that's the commission, right? To look after children, vulnerable children. And so my goal is to go out and recruit foster families who have a heart and who have a passion for kids, one, and who's willing to know what it takes, like train. So we wouldn't just put a kid in your house and say, here you go, this is your child now, right? So the children that usually come to care, they've been removed from their parents because of drugs, because of abuse, because of unsafe home conditions, sometimes bed bugs, rodents, those kind of things. I've had to take kids away from homes that have been turned into meth labs, that kind of thing. So neglect, abuse. We get a lot of the cases, calls from teachers who have noticed a cycle of these children coming in who, are unkempt, who have a malodor and just things of that nature. And so an investigation is done and they find that there's reason to believe this child is in danger, or they're not being adequately provided for. There's no food in the home. There's no running water. We need more families who are willing to open up their homes to learn what it takes to be a foster parent who cares for these children who have been through trauma, right? So it's one thing, you as a parent, you have your own struggles and dealing with your own child who's come from you, right? Who has their own little personality, who you can control to an extent. But then you bring in somebody else's child into your home who's been sexually abused, who's gone from home to home, 13 to 20 plus homes, who's been in and out of juvie, whose last name has been changed more than twice, and so they don't have a real connection with anybody. Their family could be in state or out of state. My deal is to find stable families, whether you're a single mother or a single father, or you have a two-parent household, and I do an inspection. So the home has to be safe. It has to have certain, fire guards and things of that nature. But then the training process is usually 4 to 6 weeks, where we train you on recognizing sexual abuse and physical abuse, the effects that has on the child, developmentally, socially, educationally, mentally, all these things. So we give that. We talk about a trauma, so the effects of trauma, of attachment issues, so separation anxieties, things of that nature. We even talk about how to maintain some type of cultural identity for that child. So we have a lot of Black kids that come into foster care, and because there's not a lot of foster families to begin with, we don't have a lot of Black homes either. So they're placed in a lot of Caucasian homes. And while anybody can show love, there's research to show that if we can identify, we look alike, we come from a similar background, culture, then there's a certain level of confidence that's built in that child that they may not have with someone of a different race or culture, right? While I welcome, diverse families, I also know the importance. I'm not going to hide that we need more Black families that are stepping up to the call of taking care of these Black children. And so going through that process as a parent, building that confidence to be able to take on such a, I look at it as a ministry, because it is something that God called us to do. It takes more than just money, So once a child is placed, it depends on, and that's the thing, some of the issues or some of the concerns that most parents have when it comes to fostering, when they decide if they want to foster or not, is how will this child, if they have kids still in the home, how will their behaviors interact with my child? How would they influence my child? Could they influence my child? I don't want them to be exposed to the same things that this foster child has been exposed to, whether it's cursing, whether it's sexualized behaviors, that kind of thing. Another thing is the money. Is it going to be more money coming out of my pocket, or, will I be able to afford them? And usually you do get a stipend, a monthly stipend for each day the child is in the home. The other thing is, when you have a child, there's, like you said earlier, when you parent, especially a child that's not your own, situations come up, like you said earlier, that make you think about yourself, right? That bring up issues that you didn't know were there, or that you had buried from your own experiences. So it's having that support system, whether it's therapy there's family members or neighbors or whatever your support system is like. And so in fostering through Functional Home or through Fortress of Faith, we provide those outlets of support.
Okay, thank you. Can you, as a potential foster parent, can you pick and choose which child you want to foster, or are the children just placed automatically?
So you give us a list of your preferences. So if you want a child newborn 0 to 5 years old, then we have an intake process. So CPS and some of the other third parties where we, receive children from, they will give a list, emails come in daily of all these kids who need placement. If we find someone, a child that matches your preferences, whether it's, I need a child that doesn't, bedwetting may be an issue, or I have my own child, so I have a daughter, and so I feel comfortable only bringing in young ladies, that's around the same age as my children. So you give us your preferences, the age range, the sex, the behaviors, of the child. And we take that into consideration when matching you. We call you first once we find the child, and you also tell us how many kids you want. If you want a sibling group, if you only want one, we call you and let you know, hey, we have this child. And a lot of times it's that day. So we call you, then it's like you gotta kind of be prepared to say yes that day. Or maybe the next day we can schedule to have them brought to you the next day. So we'll call you and see if this is a good match. If you find that this is a good match for you, and then you say yes, and then we bring the child to your home. We do an introduction, and they're your baby until either the courts decide that they need to be, they can be reunified with their parents or their biological family, or another adopted family has been found. So you can decide, you can foster to just straight foster, or you can foster to adopt, which means you take a child, right, and you foster them until their case is over. Or if the parental rights are terminated, then that means that they're up for adoption. If you decide that, hey, I've bonded with this child, they've become a part of our family now, I cannot see them going anywhere else, then you could potentially adopt them as well.
Okay, so basically fostering for the most part is, you just taking care of the child while the case is open and things are being resolved. But if things are not resolved, can you foster forever? Or, if you don't want to adopt, let's say if they're 18 and their case is not resolved, and then if they want to leave, they can leave, or how does it work?
So you can foster for the life of the case or until the child ages out. So a child ages out at 18, but the way the state of Texas works is if they age out, then the state will pay for their college. So they can go to university, they could be a professional student, they can go get their master's, they can get their doctorate or whatever. It's great when a foster parent decides, hey, even though I didn't adopt you, you have a home to come back to. So I've seen that where the child goes off to college, but they come back for Christmas breaks, for holidays, things of that nature. They have a family, parents to call if they're in trouble or something, which these kids need. So so you can foster for the life that agency is open. Even if it closes, then you can transfer to another agency that's open, and you just continue to foster. I've had parents that have fostered one child up until they aged out, or up until they were adopted. And you have other parents who have fostered 50 plus children, over the lifetime of them fostering. So it just depends on where you and your family want to go with it.
And can you foster multiple kids at once, or it has to be one after the other?
No, so you can foster multiple children at once. The thing is, it depends on the space that you have
Okay.
and children who are already there. Typically, one foster home can't have more than 5 children total or 6 children total. That means in addition to your own biological kids. So if you have 3 kids, then you can only have 3 foster children or adoptive children in the home.
Okay.
If you don't have any children, and you can have up to 6 children if they have adequate space for them.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Now, how can people reach out to you? I wish we could continue this conversation, but unfortunately, we have to end here. How can people reach out to you? Because I know for sure that a lot of our people have concerns, family related or parent related concerns, and even foster home related concerns that they would definitely want to reach out to you to talk more about it. So, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can give me a call. I can be reached at 832-770-8550. I encourage anyone who's interested in fostering or even kinship foster. So if you're a family member and you have family, children, or cousins or nieces or nephews that have unfortunately been taken away from their parents, and you as a family member want to bring those kids in, I can help you with that as well. But call that number, 832-770-8550, or you can email me at fortcoalition@gmail.com. That's FORTCOALTION @gmail.com. And I also have an Instagram, Fort Coalition.
Yes, I'm gonna place all of that information in the show notes for sure. I just really want to thank you for having this empowering conversation with me. There's so much to unpack. Hopefully we can have another conversation on a different topic. I know I didn't even get to touch like your experience with prison ministry, like talking to prisoners. I mean, even talking to the miners and the industry workers and stuff like that. Like that's a whole topic that we also have to talk about, because these are topics that don't only surround our mental well-being, but also just how we relate and communicate with each other and deal with each other in our community. So thank you so much. It was such a great and important conversation. I learned so much, and thankfully, at least we're cordial to an extent, so I can always reach out to you if I have any additional questions. So I really appreciate your participation on this platform. And do you have any last words before we go?
No, my only last word is if you find a passion, you find that it's in your heart to take the space of a parent for one of these vulnerable children, go for it. Don't let fear stop you from doing what God has called us all to do, which is to take care of these little ones. I really appreciate the platform and being able to talk with you, and I'm looking forward to many more.
Thank you so much, Kirby. Well, I'll catch you in the next episode.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.